If you want to be more effective when it comes to leading large-scale projects, then you're going to get a lot out of today's episode on the Meeting Leadership Podcast. That's because we're interviewing project management expert Elizabeth Harrin.
Are you a professional who wants to become a more effective leader? Then get ready for practical tips from the coach with the experience and inspiration to help you succeed in any leadership situation. You're listening to the Meeting Leadership Podcast with Gordon Shepherd.
Welcome to another episode of the Meeting Leadership Podcast. My name is Gordon Shepherd, and I just want to say thank you for listening right now. Thank you for being the type of person who shares the philosophy that if you want to be a great leader, you have to learn how to run a great meeting. And if you want to learn how to run a great meeting, you have to be a great leader. And you're coming to this podcast to get the practical tips, the inspiration, the incentives to learn how to do just that. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to be here. And I am also really proud to let you know that this episode of the Meeting Leadership Podcast is brought to you by the Meeting Leadership Academy. Now, if you and your team know that you're struggling in your meetings and you want to take it up a notch, then consider checking out the training at the Academy. There you're going to find live training options like a great half day that can spark you and your team. And also there's some wonderful online training options as well. And you can learn all about that by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/academy. And now I am really proud to introduce today's episode. It's called How Project Managers Can Become Effective Leaders, and it's with Elizabeth Harrin. Now, Elizabeth, well, she has over 20 years of experience in leading IT, business change, and process improvement projects. She's done that in the UK and France, and she's done it in different sectors like financial services and healthcare. And not only is Elizabeth an expert in project management, she's also the author of 5 books and the award-winning blogger behind Girl's Guide to PM. That's Girl's Guide to Project Management, where she has literally influenced all kinds of people around the world to really, demystify and get the jargon out of this project management stuff and really make it accessible and something they get excited about to go to work with every day. And with that in mind, I'm not going to hold you back any longer. Here's the terrific interview with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it's just so good to have a rebel from the project management space, so well defined. I think we're going to talk about your website later, of course. It is outstanding in terms of all the work that you've been doing, I'm going to say internationally, to help project managers, especially a lot of women in this space, to simply get better at what they do, to gain the confidence that they need to really go out and be more effective. And I think there's so much in the spirit of what you do that's like, you know what? That textbook doesn't have all the answers. There's a real world aspect that you bring all of your good experience to. But for the people that haven't met you yet, and when you talk about your experience, how would you describe yourself?
Well, that was a pretty awesome introduction. Thank you. But I'm just an ordinary project manager, really. So I'm a leader with this very small L of my small part of the world and the work that I do. But I suppose what I've been doing over the last 15 years is mentoring, working with project managers in similar positions and trying to demystify some of the stuff that we have to get done to get our work done, because so much project management theory makes it sound really complicated, but actually that's not helpful for us in the real world. We just have to get on with knowing how to get these things done and how to get people to work with us. So as project managers, as project leaders, as leaders more generally, I try to help people unpick what they need to do to keep their work moving in the right direction.
Well, and the big thing I hope people pick up in your tone is how approachable you are in terms of what you're doing. And again, it's very real world, and I think that comes across in spades. Demystify. When you say demystify, what do you mean?
Well, for those of you who are not familiar with sort of a project management background, there's a massive, great big book called The Project Management Body of Knowledge, published by PMI, Project Management Institute. And I work in the UK, so we have a similar thing with our body of knowledge from the Association for Project Management. And I'm a fellow, so I get to see these books and look through them, and they're complicated. There's a massive amount of jargon. And while jargon is good if you want to make yourself look important and bamboozle your colleagues, it's not actually helpful if you're trying to understand a topic for the first time. So we all have to get things done at work. And when you go to look for advice about how to do this, and it's a 500-page textbook with words you don't understand and diagrams of bar charts and stuff, people struggle. And that's normal because it's a new topic for everybody and no one has the time these days to do that kind of stuff. So if you're a project manager and that's your job title, it might be part of your career path to study this stuff and go and take an exam in it and be certified. And that's perfectly fine. And a lot of people who I work with have done that. And then they find that actually what they learned to pass the exam isn't really helpful in real life. Mainly, and leaders will appreciate this, because when you put people in the mix, the theory doesn't always work as well.
Oh, you mean those bar charts don't simply follow a linear path and then things are perfect? I mean, when I think about the complexity of some of your work in healthcare and the financial industries that you've been in, and I know that it's funny, I've got a bunch of education under my belt. So MBA and undergraduate degrees, and even hearing my son talk about recently as a graduate from high school, being frustrated that a whole bunch of the stuff he learned in high school doesn't apply to kind of his next step. And I think this complexity of, again, theory, when people walk in the room with that kind of thing and real people are in the room on the other side who have no concept of where you're coming from, it's simply voodoo. So you help them to decrypt that? Is that the idea?
Yes, basically, in a nutshell, yes. Because as a leader, you have to be able to be approachable. You have to be able to get your ideas across to other people. You have to be able to engage them and to get them to work with you. And on a project, we're all working for the same goal. We've got something that we want to achieve. And if you've got half the people around the room thinking, this is an interesting presentation, but I haven't got a clue what she's talking about, then frankly, they're not going to be doing their project tasks. They're not going to be completing their work. They don't buy into the vision, all the leadership-y stuff that we want them to do that we know in theory is good. They'll just walk out thinking, well, I don't know what to do next. People who don't know what to do nothing.
The leadership-y stuff. I love this. This is all about what this podcast is about. And I think let's just break it down to a real-world example. When I think about the impact of project managers, either at, say, the government level, at the financial institution level, at the healthcare level, this is where quite literally the hundreds of millions, and I'm going to say billions of dollars are being shelled out. And it's project managers often that are involved, say, in big system implementation, specifically around IT. And I know there are other things that they do as well. But let's just pick an IT example. Let's say you're in your healthcare setting, you've got your new IT system coming in, and they've dropped their, whatever it is, £100 million, some amount of money that's gone into the situation. And you're a project manager and you're now in charge of this complex project. From a leadership perspective, you know you're going into stakeholder groups, all kinds of them, to manage them. What are your kind of early tips for project managers when they're, say, in a kickoff meeting for one of these big projects where there's lots of people at the table? What are your first suggestions from a leadership point of view?
Well, I think the most important thing, the most successful IT healthcare project I've ever worked on is where we had a really clear goal. We had about 20 of us, probably a smaller group than that being our core team. It was putting new software into 38 hospitals, so it was quite large scale. It took over a year. And we knew every day we woke up, we had one thing to do, which was get this software installed in hospitals. That was our sole purpose. And when you've only got one goal and it is crystal clear and everybody knows what that achievement is that you're striving for, suddenly everything else falls into place. It makes decision making very easy because you think, does this help me install my software into hospitals? No, it does not. Therefore, we're not going to do it. Or yes, it does. So let's take that step, make that decision. Shall we spend this money? Is it going to help us achieve our goal? Once you've got that very crystal clear goal, everything else really lines up behind it. Well, but I can give you a real example if you'd like.
Oh, yeah, please.
Of you talked about going into a room and there being different stakeholders and how do you engage with the disparate groups. And we had that exact problem on that project, putting that software into those hospitals, actually, because it was software for radiologists to use, people who take x-rays, who read the x-rays after somebody else has put the person into the machine and taken the photographs. And we found, I'm an IT person by background, I have IT project management experience, and there's no way I can influence a consultant radiologist who's studied years and years and has all these medical degrees. And I might know everything to do with installing the software, I might be the best project manager in the world, but I'm not influential in that sphere because I am not a clinician. So in terms of being able to lead the team and get this change in, one of the things we had to do was identify people who were influential. So we found some doctors who were technically on it and who wanted to support our new software because they saw the benefit, they understood why it was going to help them manage their practice and support patients. And then we used them, and they spread the word about what we were doing, and they really helped us to gain a bit of traction in a clinical community where we personally, as a project team, had no influence. So I think that, for me as a leader of that project, sometimes people really want to take the credit for everything. And I couldn't take the credit for that because I basically did nothing. I spoke to some doctors, they went off and they talked to their friends, and suddenly our project was easier. And I think if you can be humble and take a step back and think, how do I know where I'm going, I know what my goal is, I need some help to help me get there. And it doesn't matter to me that it's not my name on the thing that people are going to give credit to. That doesn't make any sense. But if it's not my name on the email that is sent to say, I want your support in achieving this. So basically, I'm trying to say, use the people around you to help you achieve what you need to do.
Project managers need a slice of humility. There was a great coach on the show. Her name is Leanne Brownoff. She talked about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. She told a great story about how the leader in the first few days of their climb or whatever it was at the front. And then when the hard part of the climb came up, his apprentice, he put his apprentice at the front and then he led from behind. What I'm hearing here thematically is that project managers not only have to have a clear goal, but they need humility to be able to be in the situation and whatever it takes kind of to get it done. Because there might be a moment where you as the project manager are kind of the clear leader, or in this case, you found the way to get it done. And at the core of all projects is change, and people just don't like change.
That's absolutely right. And you put that very concisely, much better than I did. Thank you.
I think this change piece in the real world, you just can't get it in textbooks, right? You've got to kind of get into those situations where you are in the room and you fail in a sense, and you win some, you lose some, you're going to run into all these different personalities. And then project managers, it's not like you're there somewhere for 10 years, right? You're going from one thing to the next to the next. So you're always coming into like a first time with new stakeholder groups.
That's correct. And what we tend to find is that all projects have an element of uniqueness about them. We might be repeating something. So we repeated that project 38 times in 38 different locations, but every location had different characters involved and different specific factors to take into account. So it was unique every time, even though we had a formula by the end of it. And I think that's a real good point for leaders to think about, how do we learn lessons and bring those lessons forward when the team changes? And one thing I see time and time again in the project managers that I mentor and the organizations I work with is that we're pretty bad at doing that. And organizational lessons learned is a real area where I think there's scope for thinking about how we do it well, and how we could improve. Let
me just jump in there, because I can tell you one of the things in my consulting work, nobody has a CRM. Mm-hmm. Nobody has a customer relationship management tool where, quite literally, and one of my simple, I have two simple questions now that I ask up front for every organization that I deal with. I say, hey, where do you write the names and phone numbers down? And we're talking to here is really just any basic organizational need, which is, what is the lifetime value of a customer, client, or whatever that is? And you just said continuity is critical. And yet, Isn't it funny that we let our continuity down? And yet, I'll bet if we went back to our, PMBOK book or whatever, they're going to say continuity is a big deal, but we don't actually get out and practice it in the real world.
No. And we find that I work with project managers who are put into a position where someone's failed to deliver a project and they've been asked to leave the organization, and they've come in and so they've gone, right, tell me all the things that went wrong, tell me all the lessons, what should I be doing differently? And everybody looks at them like, oh no, well, we don't have any of that information, we don't know. We think, well, how can you improve? If you knew you did badly last time, or you did things in a way that you wouldn't want to repeat, how can we improve if you can't articulate what it is that better? What does better look like? What does success look like? And a lot of what we do in project management is trying to work out what success looks like so we can get there.
Well, and it reminds me of those pinky rings that the engineers have to wear that is made up from, I'm going to say, hopefully rightly, that it's metal from things gone wrong, as kind of a reminder what's happened in their world. Now, that's part of the story from what I had been told before, but this thing of that constant best practice, especially from a leadership point of view, to say, what's the continuity? I know when I go in to do facilitation, for example, I never ever, people are like, oh, can you come in and facilitate for a day? I'm like, nope. I have to do it before, during, and after in the situation, because the before part, I need to get in touch with whoever the main people are in that situation, one-on-one, because I want to break down any of that personality stuff as quickly as I can. And I don't want to do any discovery on the day when I get there. So that's really, really an important element for me, I know, from a facilitation point of view. The next part I just want to jump into is around your confidence building, because you actually mentor project managers. And so in the
Yes.
area of helping them learn how to influence, what's been some of your experience from a mentorship point of view?
I think the key lesson I've taken from this is something that I was lucky enough to learn quite early on in my career from a manager who basically said it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I'm sure your audience will have heard of that before. People listening won't find that new. But for me, as a young person at work, I was surprised because it made me feel like I had authority. It made me feel like I had the power to make a decision and that other people would either back me or I'd end up apologizing for my actions and we just move on. And that's been a bit of a mantra for me to live by. And I find that a lot of people don't feel they have the ability or the authority or the decision-making capability to take those steps. And yet we're all in a role where we have to make decisions. And what I find is if I can give people permission, then they can make those decisions themselves. And there was a recent conversation I was having with somebody and they were thinking about a situation. And I said, well, have you asked? Have you asked for that piece of information? And she said, well, no. And I said, well, you could just ring the client and ask. And she went, oh, and it would be okay if I did that? But yes, it really would. And if it's not, they'll just say, I can't share that with you. I'm sorry. And you hang up the phone and you just go about your day.
Wow.
So I think sometimes it's the work culture that people are in that makes them feel so unempowered. So part of what I try to do, and I'm sure that, you know, all good leaders around the world try to do, is empower people to be their best self and to take decisions. If it's in the best interest of the organization, if you feel it's the right thing, then I think you should just do it.
Oh, wow. This is, again, if people had only listened to the last minute of what we just said, hyper valuable to know that you should seek out mentors. So whether they hire you or get somebody in the organization to learn these simple lessons. And often, again, I'm finding I've got whatever complex charts and multi-year rollouts that I can bring into a situation I know from the consulting side. But so often it's just that, a tweak, right? Something that they can actually implement and go, oh, I have the permission to do that. The other part I want to touch on here is your website, Girl's Guide to PM, is targeted at women. What's the difference between men and women in the conversation that we're having right now?
That's a really interesting question. So I do write from a perspective of a woman, given that I am one, because at the time I started blogging, I was concerned, interested, whatever, in the fact that the majority of voices I was hearing were mainly men in conferences and writing books and magazine articles and stuff. And that wasn't my experience because I worked in a department which was 50-50 split. So I thought there was space out there for a bit of a female voice about what project management is. But in terms of my blog readers, in terms of who buys my project management templates, in terms of my mentoring clients, I do have a mix of men and women.
Wow.
So I think men probably have less issues with confidence and certainly less issues with applying for jobs, going for jobs where they may not tick every single box. Whereas in my experience, and this is only a very small pool of people I'm drawing from, but in my experience, the people that I work with who are women who would be looking for a new job may want to make sure they can tick every single box on the job description.
Well, and I hear again, it's nice to hear you be a bit demure about that. The reality is, from say even a women on boards perspective, it's 18% in terms of corporate boards and where that's going. We have a woman named Deborah Rosati who's coming up on the show in the future here. She actually runs in Canada. Women get on board to influence women around the world to start to get that number to go up. So I think your observation of that is dead on. And it's funny to hear about these differences between guys and gals and how that gap needs to be closed a little bit. And the confidence piece is really important when you're going in as a project manager. You've got to lead a lot of meetings. And something we always want to get people to get out of these interviews is the leadership tips and also the meeting tips. So you're walking in, you're a project manager, you're walking into a meeting for the first time. What are your best suggestions for running a great meeting?
My best suggestion for running a great meeting is to make sure it's a means to an end. I mean, no one wants to go to a meeting just for the sake of it. The point of the meeting is to do something, decide something, achieve something, discuss something. And so the end is more important than the meeting. I think if you can go into a meeting with your agenda, with clear goal, with the right people in the room, all those good basic meeting housekeeping things, you can get people to focus on what it is you want to achieve and then get the meeting over, really. So it's almost the most important part, I think, of the meeting is what happens when you leave. So you've had your conversation, you've taken action, you've discussed whatever it is, you've come to some conclusions in the session. But as a project manager, I'm interested in what people do when they leave the meeting. Have I been influential enough? Have We discuss things to the point that they feel they can take action. Have I got a decision? And now what do I need to do to enact that decision?
And you can reflect on that for what happened in the meeting and actually kind of measure it going forward. How did you help to create accountability after meetings in your own experience?
By being very clear about what people are signing up for and then holding people to account. And that can sometimes feel quite uncomfortable where you're following up after, because in projects we have a lot of regular meetings, so we might meet face to face, but often on my projects I'll have a weekly conference call with people as I work with a lot of virtual teams, and we go through the list of open actions from last time and we call out people by name. Have you done this task? So people are very honest and either say no, they haven't, or we can tick that one off as completed and we move on. So there's that level of accountability and that people know they're going to be followed up, which I think you get in that regular project session that you perhaps don't get with other meetings. I've certainly come out other meetings that have perhaps been a one-off session, an individual workshop, and then had to work out how do we make these actions into something that people will take seriously and not get lost in the million emails that they get every day.
Well, and thank you very much for bringing that up, because the email is a disaster. My hope is that no one ever sends out a mass email again, because so much of it is done for covering versus action. But I love this piece that you just said in there, which is there's a person, they're on a call, they're on a video call, they're in the meeting, their name gets called out, and they have to come to account for that of saying yes or no. And then you can deal with whether it was a reasonable request or whether it wasn't. So many folks just generally don't take a moment to have that piece. And really it speaks to meetings. You can make them effective if you're going to be doing before, during, and after. Like I said before, you can't just show up. There's this after piece that we just talked about, that if you don't do it, then every meeting in the future is not going to be great. And I say this for people at work. I say it for people in their volunteer settings. It really does take that level. But if you can get that going forward from a leadership point of view, you will absolutely inspire the people around you.
And you get work done. I mean, if people get into the habit of going out for a meeting and at the end saying, okay, I took away these actions. I know that I've got these actions. I told someone when I was going to get them done by, and I know Elizabeth's going to chase me up, so I will do them. And people get into the habit of being able to act on those things, which means everything that you're trying to achieve takes that next step forward, which is nice because nobody likes to nag people for their action items that they took away from the last meeting.
Well, totally.
So it needs to be done in a very nice way.
Yeah, and nobody at the end of your $1 billion healthcare project wants to say, oh, we're delivering it 3 years late. I mean, these are the incremental steps that really make things go well. So many insights on the leadership side, great insights on the meeting side. And in these interviews, we always like to end it with one really significant question, and here it comes. What inspires you?
What inspires me? I'm inspired by lots of different things, but what I love to hear from is where people are managing projects and they are just amazing. So somebody got in touch quite a long time ago and said that they were teaching girls project management in Africa and using some of the blog articles I'd written as a way to encourage girls that this was actually a real job that they could have and they could go out, grow up and be a project manager. And knowing that that is happening out there in the world, nothing to do with the fact they're using my blog articles as inspiration, but just the fact that there are people out there who didn't know that it was possible for girls to grow up and be project managers. And there are people out there who are changing that perception. That's inspiring.
Wow. I just so appreciate that you said that. So there you are doing your work in the UK. And your work has then gone out and radiated, in a sense, around the world. You're reminding me of another great guest we've had on the show. His name is Martin Parnell. Martin Parnell actually discovered ultramarathon in his 50s. He actually went out and ran 250 marathons in 1 year in the city of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and raised 250,000 Canadian dollars for a charity called Kids Right to Play. Sometime in the next couple of years, he climbed Kilimanjaro in a Guinness record of 21 hours. This guy is bananas, but then he gets his health issue. He's recovering. So when he's recovering, he reads a news story about this woman who ran the first Afghan marathon. Now, if you're a woman in Afghanistan and you go to run a marathon, your father could threaten to kill you. You can't just go out for a run. It's not part of the culture. It's something that's very, very new in their part of the world. So then Martin took a documentary filmmaker. They went over for the second marathon. They created a great film called The Secret Marathon, and it brings up the issue of, I'm going to say, girls' rights around the world, in this case, to run. What we just heard you say is the issue of bringing awareness to young girls or women around the world in places where they don't even imagine that this project management path is even possible. So what a great gift that you've got out there. I love that that inspires you as well. It sounds like it's going to really keep you on the mode to do more of your great writing and get things out. Elizabeth, if people want to get in touch with you to learn more from you, how can they do that?
I run a Facebook group for project managers and wannabe project managers, which is called Project Management Cafe. So you can come along and chat with me and the other people in there. Or Girls Guide to Project Management, girlsguidetopm.com is my blog. So you can come and find me there too.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your great spirit on the show today. It was great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I know that you're going to have to agree that that episode was absolutely worth listening to, and I really appreciated Elizabeth's really kind of practical approach to things. Phrases like leadershipy stuff and demystifying. I mean, this is a great way to take something like the PMBOK idea and really kind of break it down so that people can actually understand what they need to do when they're going to complete a project. And the other piece that I really picked up on as well was this idea of having the right attitude, especially as a young project manager, as in go do things and ask for forgiveness later. Empower yourself, go out there, become the leader that you can definitely be, and your projects will be more successful. And if you really appreciated Elizabeth's practical approach to project management and leadership, then I want to mention a couple of other episodes on the Meeting Leadership podcast that I think you're going to get a lot out of. On episode 80, it's called Why All Leaders Should Measure the Opportunity Cost of Meetings. And you can get that episode by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/80. And then on episode 9, well, it's called How a Meeting Mentor Can Improve Your Leadership Skills. And we know that Elizabeth mentioned she does mentorship as well. I think this is a highly valuable thing to go after, and this episode will really help you along, and you can get it by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/9. And finally, on episode 81, you're going to get a demonstration, and it's called Meeting Leadership Exercises, the Pros and Cons Technique for Managing Disagreements. Now, we all know that disagreements come up during meetings, and you can use the thing that you learn in this episode to actually take into your next meeting to make it significantly better if people aren't getting along. And you can get that episode by going to meetingleadershipinc.com/81. And I also want to let you know that this episode of the Meeting Leadership Podcast is brought to you by the Meeting Leadership Academy. Now, I can tell you the live workshop that's been applied from the Academy has helped engineers, doctors, accountants, human resource professionals, and a whole lot more. And I know that it can help you and your team. So I highly recommend that you go to meetingleadershipinc.com/academy to check that out. And if you haven't done it yet, take a moment to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss another episode on the show. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Meeting Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Meeting Leadership Podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more strategies to help you become an outstanding leader. And don't forget to rate and review so we can bring you even more great content. We'll see you next time, right here on the Meeting Leadership Podcast.
I'm on top of the world, now I'm living. And the good just gets better, keeps on giving. Not even close to the end.